Welcome, dear colleagues, friends, interested people in Asia and transitional justice and peace building. For today's dialogue on transitional justice, we will look concretely into transitional justice and peace building and in Asia, the challenges as well as strategic responses. We're very pleased to have you with us here in the room or far away in different places via Zoom for this very timely exchange on what is happening in Asia and how does it impact our peace building and transitional justice efforts. And we'll dwell a bit on a bit grim and dire context, but also have some hopeful insights and a bit of a focus on Myanmar with our colleagues here from AJAR. I'm Barbara Unger. I'm Senior Advisor with Berghof Foundation, in which octagon we're sitting, and specifically with the TJ Hub. And what we're having here is our fourth dialogue on transitional justice of this hub. And if you've been a guest or a participant on one of our previous exchanges, you will remember that we've had a bit of more diverse speakers. You know, we've had controversial discussions and a bit of different positions. And you might be wondering why we now have our partners of AJAR here at the front. But this is just to bring us on the same page and sort of prepare on what we hope to be a very lively dialogue on what's happening in Asia and what can we contribute from here. And this is a bit based on the assumption and our analysis, more clearly, that Asia is getting a bit less attention than it should be getting, and especially some of the conflicts and some of the activities that our colleagues here will tell us more on briefly. For those of you and those of us who haven't been part of previous exchanges, if you allow me a couple of words on the TJ Hub, on our partner AJAR, and on the colleagues accompanying us today. And before I do that, just for all of us to be on the same page, this event will be recorded. So just for you to be extra aware of that. And I think it's a benefit for the topics we'll discuss that they get some more audience than just those of us in the room and those of us online. So the Global Learning Hub for Transitional Justice and Reconciliation is a network of organizations, both from Germany and across the world, initiated by the Berghof Foundation and the Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development in early 22. And it reflects a diversity of experience, and the aspiration is to benefit from each other's experience and strength to promote each other's work and our joint work on transitional justice and reconciliation. So we want to facilitate inspiring dialogues. We want to build capacity. We want to learn from each other and advance the policy and practice of dealing with the past to strengthen peace and justice. So nothing less. So we're well advised to listen today, especially to our partners from AJAR, the Asia Justice and Rights organization, I might add in brackets, from Asia. You are based in Jakarta. You've been active since 2012 and individually before that to increase the capacity of local and national organizations in the fight against impunity. You have been doing a diverse range of activities and programs to build cultures based on accountability, a fight against impunity, to build justice and counter atrocities, and working in those countries to build a more stable democratic base following prolonged authoritarian rules. I'm just saying this in brief, and I'm maybe too brief, but you will listen to much more, both on the context, but also on what AJAR is doing in the region, but also in Myanmar in a second. So the joint analysis is that there's a worrying trend of returning to authoritarian rule in the region, and there's ongoing conflicts, very strong conflicts, and there's a growing anti-democratic influence of China and Russia in the region. And still, this is not on the forefront of news and political debate here in Europe. I mean, on a day like today, after the elections to the European Parliament, this might be a not emblematic day, but, you know, we're much worried about what's happening around democracy, even in our own region. And we might see that seeing Myanmar on the headlines is hardly happening. So we are called for, and you've attended our call to change this a bit. And we're quite aware that we're here preaching to the converted. You are here. You're not the ones who are forgetting this conflict. But let's maybe also discuss later on jointly on what we can do to change this a bit. And not in the sense of just look to Asia now and forget about the rest, but how can we work for a peaceful, more just, more human rights-based world with all of us. So you might be wondering why I'm talking so much while we have so many, 3 very interesting guests here. To my right is Patrick Burgess. Patrick, I could speak for half an hour or you could speak for even more to tell us about your many experiences. You're a lawyer from Australia, and you've since many years worked on peace and justice challenges in Asia, but also very much beyond. You're based in Indonesia. You've worked on Timor-Leste, on Thailand, the Philippines, Myanmar, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Cambodia, and I could continue on and on, Malaysia, Afghanistan, Yemen, Kenya, Uganda. So you have here an expert who can not only tell you about Asia, but also a bit of how it compares and what experiences can be shared, but also learned from the other contexts. And you've been also previously a principal member of the Australian Refugee Tribunal, Director of Human Rights for 2 UN peacekeeping missions in Timor-Leste, and you've held a range of other post-conflict leadership roles. I encourage you to speak to Patrick, and also we don't have a guitar here, but he has used his creativity not only to inspire the peacemakers and transitional justice experts he's been working with, but also use the creativity in a musical way, which is quite exciting, I find. So Patrick will in a minute introduce us more into the trends and the current contexts. And then we will speak more and learn more from Galu Bandita. Oh, and Patrick, of course, is the president of AJAR. That's what I forgot. And Galu is another co-founder and executive director of AJAR. And you've been the deputy director of the Timor-Leste Truth Commission and very essential author of its report, AJAR, in 2005. You've been senior associate for the International Center for Transitional Justice, and you're also a member of AJAR's working group on the stolen children. And I'm sure we'll learn more about that. So I rush you through that a bit to listen more to you later on. You have been engaged, and you're still an advisor with the AJAR Truth and Reconciliation Commission, another challenge. So that's been keeping us busy and you busy since 2017. So very excited to have you here and to learn more from you. And to my far left, to your far right, is Moses Gung. Moses is from Myanmar, and he's the program director for AJAR's Myanmar program. I believe you joined AJAR as a training officer in 2022 and have previously worked as a protection associate for UNHCR, as well with the International Organization for Migration and the Danish Refugee Council in their gender-based violence and trafficking prevention of child protection programs. And you hold a BA of Chiang Mai University. So we will learn from you and with you a lot about what Myanmar is going through these days, for those of you who have not been following the news and haven't been seeing what's going on. If you allow me one word of housekeeping, those of you in the room have the slight advantage over those of you online. You can see a loop of images coming from AJAR's work, showcasing some of the activities. I believe my colleague Matthias, who's been, my colleague Lucas, working with the tech part, might rope you in and give you the opportunity later on. And we've also the beautiful images of some of the concrete work in Myanmar, some body maps around the room, which will illustrate some of what Moses will tell us later on. So we'll try to rope you in a moment and try to make the best of the hybrid setting, because we hope to have a very lively dialogue with all of you. After we have a bit of introduction from the panelists, we'll spend most of the time also discussing with all of us. Yeah, so please, when you're online and sending your comments and observations to the Zoom Q&A, please tell us also your name and your organization if you want to be identified, but also for the benefit of all of us. And my colleague, Matthias, who's hosting that room, will tie together some of the questions and observations and bring them to our discussion. And I will ask the same, obviously, from those of us sitting in the room with us. So let us get really started into what our colleagues can share with us. So, Patrick, there can be only a lengthy introduction or a very short one to what AJAR is living today. I'm opting for the short one, and I would like to ask you, what are the challenges that you and AJAR are living through, facing, are working in, but also analyzing for the countries you work in? I mean, we come to Myanmar with more detail, but if you sort of set us the floor, I believe there's rather much than little to talk about.
Thank you very much. And thanks to everybody for coming along today to talk with us and discuss with us. I'm looking forward to hearing some of your views later on. When we're looking at Asia, it's quite a daunting task. Sometimes, when you're living in Europe or North America, you kind of put Asia off to the side and we forget that it's about half of the world's population that lives in what we can call Asia. And that the conflicts are so many. And I mean, if I just go through in my own head some of the death tolls that we have in the country, 1965, Indonesia, up to 2 million, 30,000 in Aceh, up to maybe 100,000 in Papua. We move north, we've got the Philippines with the ongoing problems in Mindanao, in Thailand, 8,000 dead in the south. Then we move to Sri Lanka, 40,000 dead at the end of the war. There's Bangladesh, estimated 3,300,000 women raped in the 1971 genocide, and the ongoing conflict in Myanmar, 20 to 30 million casualties in China in the Cultural Revolution. So apart from when we start moving into Afghanistan, the stands, etc. So we have this diverse region, and I was in Rwanda in 1994, working immediately after the genocide there. I worked in Yemen. I've recently been working in Ethiopia and other countries as well. And one of the things that I've learned is you don't see a situation of mass conflict and then the end of it. What you see over and over is cycles of violence. So the underlying root causes are still there. It breaks out into mass killing, rape, torture. There may be peace for some time and then it starts again and again. So our job, if we want peace, is to look at the root causes and what contributes to those cycles of violence. And that's what's concerning us now across our region, as well as your region and globally, I think, is a retreat in the democratic values and a return to authoritarian tendencies. In the last very recent future, we've had an election in Indonesia, which has returned a former general he's now the president, deeply implicated in past mass violations. In the Philippines, we have the former dictator Marcos's son as the president. The recent results of the election in Thailand saw a significant majority for a person who the military and the courts did not allow to take power. We have Vietnam and Laos, which are communist regimes where you cannot criticize the government at all. And then we have Myanmar, which is now where the junta a few years ago took over the entire country, called all the ministers in and said, please give us your resignation. We're taking over. It's now a military state. And most of the population is resisting that. We're going to hear more about that. So this is the trend that we're facing in Asia. And the problem is that when you have an authoritarian regime, when the military is very involved, you always have mass human rights violations. And it's usually also that the economy doesn't look very good. And most of the time, the authoritarian regime is involved in grand theft with guns. And that's what we see in Myanmar. The military, they can take what they want when you can't criticize them, and they can share that between themselves and their families. So the situation is retreating in these countries. The generals are back. The authoritarian ways of governing are back. And that means for us that the trends of human rights violations are increasing, that human rights defenders and journalists are being jailed more often, that the electronic media laws are being used very often. When you're saying the truth on electronic media, you'll be prosecuted for a violation of those laws. Environmental defenders, the large-scale palm oil and other industries are very closely aligned to military very often, and environmental defenders are also being targeted. So what do we do about that? And that was the question that we asked ourselves when we established Asia Justice and Rights, AJAR. Was it 13 years ago now? What should we do? And what we decided to focus on is the empowerment of local organizations that have already, it's like when you plant a seed in a dry patch, if you plant a seed somewhere where nothing's growing, it's likely when you leave, it's going to die. You can water it for a long time. But if you look around, you see that there have been sprouts on their own that just need some help. They can grow stronger. So we work with local organizations that have already formed to fight against injustice, to fight for the truth, for victims' rights in these contexts. And our mission is to try and strengthen those organizations so that they can carry on this struggle for truth, justice, and victims' rights in their own context. And this field is, I mean, a lot of our work is within the umbrella of what we call transitional justice. I think transitional justice has kind of been hijacked by international lawyers. I'm an international lawyer, but there's so much more to this field in the international courts and truth commissions, for example, which a lot of people think is the whole field. And transitional justice, I think Kofi Annan put it very eloquently when he more or less said that it's all of the things a society does to deal with a history of mass violations. So here we are in Berlin, all of the things that the German state does and the civil society does to deal with a history of mass violations is within transitional justice, including prosecuting those responsible, uncovering and sharing the truth about what's happened and learning from that, using that truth to design the reforms that we need to break the cycles of violence, and assisting victims through reparations. So those four areas we work on, and we work very much with grassroots communities and victims, and link that to ASEAN, the EU, and the UN. So that's one of AJAR's added values, is that we can work at various levels, but we do more with victims than most other organizations do because we want to be rooted at that level. I know that this time is short, but just very briefly on those four elements, people say, oh, prosecutions is a waste of time. You're never going to be able to prosecute the generals in Myanmar or the generals in Indonesia. Well, that's true to a degree, but in my view, calling for prosecutions, constantly demanding accountability, making them uncomfortable, publicizing the demands is a big contributor to stopping recurrence. So when we look at those four elements of transitional justice, I don't measure the success in prosecutions in the number of people who are jailed, because we know the leaders are very unlikely to be successfully prosecuted. But if we keep calling for that, when we make them uncomfortable, we might make it impossible for them to travel. They'll be embarrassed. The next person hopefully will be less likely to do the same thing. The truth-seeking, the second element, is particularly important because if in all of these contexts, the truth is a victim, the governments deny, distort the truth because they don't want people to know that they've been torturing, raping, killing in order to steal very much. So we need to document from victims, from witnesses, from others, bring out that truth. It's often called truth-seeking, but I think it should be truth-seeking and sharing. There's no power in the truth unless we share it. So we do that in a number of ways, and Galu will talk a little bit about that. The third element of reparations is helping victims. We might look at grand systems of reparations, but in the context we work in, we often don't have very much money at all for victims. But we do try and use whatever there is available to help them get social services, if there's any medical care, emergency reparations. And in Timor, we help the victims to get prosthetic limbs, emergency mental health care for those who are severely affected, for example. And the reforms that we need to undertake to stop the violations happening again. We're going to talk more about Myanmar in a minute, but for example, just to take Myanmar, the same as all the other contexts, when we use the truth of what we've learned and what are the root causes, then we can design the reforms we need. We used to call it institutional reform in the transitional justice framework when I started 25 years ago. Now I call it institutional and social reforms. The UN calls it guarantees of non-repetition because they love simplicity. So because when we look at these conflicts across the region, very often discrimination is a core element of a conflict driver. In Indonesia, you see the majority Muslim population and the conflicts in Christian Papua and Christian East Timor. You move to the Philippines, you have a Catholic majority and the conflict in the Muslim minority Mindanao. Move over to Thailand, you have a Buddhist majority and the conflict in the Muslim minority Patani in the south. Go to Myanmar, you have a Buddhist majority. In Rakhine State, the Rohingya, very much the victims. Sri Lanka, a Buddhist majority, and the Hindu Tamils, the victims in the north. Very often we see that the conflict drivers involve a lack of equality, a lack of equal rights to minorities. So that needs to be one of the factors driving the reforms that we make in order to stop these cycles of violence. So we work on the prosecution, calling for it, even if we don't get it. We link with the ICC. There's a case for Myanmar and a case for the Philippines in the ICC being investigated. We work on truth. There's been a truth commission in Timor-Leste that we worked on for 3 years. There's a recent one in Aceh, subnational. There was one in Thailand, some difficult ones in Nepal. But we deal at the lower level to bring out the truth and share it. Reparations for victims, if we can't get much money, we do tiny, small pieces, whatever we can. And the reforms need to be linked to the truth of what are the root causes. So that's my general introduction of what we do. It could go on for a lot longer, but I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Patrick, especially also for laying the ground and for linking the grim situation, but already with transitional justice principles and what can be done. I think it's a beautiful illustration that transitional justice need not be some abstract and very prosecution and accountability-centered instrument of Western jurists, as you hinted on, but it is something that really helps to get hope, to get some angle on the root causes and on the need for the reforms that prevent things to be happening again. So breaking or stopping or interrupting these cycles of violence. And Galu, if I'm turning already to you, when we spoke first about the broad, ample things you could tell us, same as Patrick, we said we would focus also on what are strategic engagements that everybody can learn from the work of AJAR and from colleagues and networks in the region, because I think that is a bit of hope, a bit of spirit, a bit of, not only staying at this, oh, this looks so really complicated, it's protracted conflicts, and it's far away for us Germans. So please showcase us a bit more what can really be done and your experiences with it and what you could share also with other regions. The hub has partners in the other continents, so we're always eager to learn from each other.
Thanks, Barbara. So I think even though the trend in Asia and globally is towards darkness and oppression, transitional justice processes in Asia has been in deadlock for decades. So we have already had to think about how can we still use this, I think a really useful framework of looking at victims' rights in a holistic way. And how can we find a way to work with survivors and civil society and look for those cracks? How can we work with joy and hope in situations where it's really quite difficult? So that's, I think, the challenge we had when we started AJAR. Very quickly in our process, we started developing, this is called our AJAR's Unlearning Impunity manual series. So we had many different exercises that we do with survivors, and now from Timor-Leste, from Indonesia, we're using in Myanmar and Sri Lanka, and lots of places. Participatory action research has existed from a long time, but marrying it with transitional justice is, I think, was kind of the new thing that we brought. So one of the things you can see sometimes in the pictures you see, we created this framework: truth, justice, repair, and freedom from violence, and created safe spaces for survivors to either put a stone saying that, no, I don't have truth or I don't have justice in my life because ... Or a flower. Yes, there is some repair in my life because now I have my family together, etc. So there's no right or wrong. It's not some lawyer or some professor telling us what do you have in transitional justice in your society, but it's a very subjective kind of interpretation. We did that work initially with women survivors, including in Buru Island in Indonesia, where for the atrocities that happened in 1965, there has been very little justice and even continuous denial from the Indonesian government. And we found that, they put a flower in justice. Like, okay, why? Well, because the prison guard that held us prisoner, he died of a heart attack. So that's justice for me. So it's so interesting. Of course, it allows for us to sort of comment and discuss these things according to their point of view. And it's a really powerful tool because later on you move towards what are the common issues that we want to work on. In Rhode Island, for example, they said, well, for me, justice would be in my marriage certificate, it says occupation, political prisoner. And I would like occupation to be farmer because that's what I am. So then with the local groups, we went to the registry office and managed to organize that. That's, a small example of like a micro justice in the world, but it's still an important one. You can see from the pictures also in Timor-Leste, for example, we've been looking for the children who were taken by the Indonesian soldiers. Thousands were taken between 1975 to 1999. We've now found about 170 of them. About 50% we've been able to find their families, and we've had these, kind of miracle reunions. Can you imagine people who they thought their children had died? They have a graveyard, a cemetery in their names on the graveyard, and then to find out that they're alive it's a process that, of course, the reunion is not enough. We need to do a lot more, and we need to have the two states to be involved in the process. It is not enough for us to work on it as civil society. We have a working group made up of Indonesian and Timor-Leste NGOs. And that really is also kind of a living, breathing testimony to reconciliation, because the people in Indonesia did not know about the stolen children, and the people in Timor-Leste, you know, there can be hope to meet their children again, now all adults, obviously. There is also a situation where the Timorese government wants to appease Indonesia because it's the big brother, and, you know, especially now with the recent elections. So we still fight inside those cracks. In the Rohingya camps, where, you know, life is very difficult for more than 1 million people living in plastic shelters now. More since 2017, even more came across the border. We've been trying to educate and learn from them about, you know, their views about justice and truth. You will see that we've been developing beautiful embroidery quilts telling the stories of their survival, and that's become a way for us to also give information about what is the ICC, what is the ICJ, and it's so complicated, and yet without them understanding what it means, how can there be any genuine meaning without that? And maybe the last example, which is very interesting at this time, in Timor-Leste, where with support from the Global Survivor Fund, we're starting a survivor-led process for interim reparations for victims of sexual violence, and their children born of rape. So now we've documented more than 400. Many of them are, you know, elderly now, but they haven't had the care and the support that they needed. So bringing in the young generation in that process so that they understand what happened, they don't forget, and then that also becomes a tool to strengthen the commitment of young people to fight against impunity and to fight against sexual violence. So that's some of the examples.
Thank you, Galu, and many more examples to be asked about and to be told about in the next hour. Thank you. I'm really impressed at how the cracks are found and how creatively you deal with it. And I think we'll learn from Moses a bit more on how that is done concretely in one context, namely Myanmar. I think all of us present here are quite aware that Myanmar is on the top of some of the conflict indices and is one of the deadliest, most intense conflicts. Yet, I hardly see it on German news. And Moses, we spoke before, how much do you need to go into depth to really situate Myanmar? And I think we're quite happy that you take us on a bit of a tour, but also really focus on what you do and where you see opportunities, not only for AJARs and your own work, but also for the international community and us present, but also those we can lobby on and whom we can influence and advise to come in, so that the Myanmar conflict is at least getting onto a more positive future. Not that we attempt that to say this is something easy or something that can soon be accomplished. But given all the signs of hope we have from other parts, I think the incremental parts and the steps that we need to take to make justice happen and to make human rights become more of a reality are much welcome. So Moses, the floor is yours. Thank you for coming.
Good evening. My name is Moses. I'm from Myanmar. I'm actually from the northernmost part of Myanmar. So it was good that I checked with some of my German friends, you know, whether I should run a bit of like Myanmar geography lesson. Is that, you should run, but then we are not Americans, you know. So, okay, I'll talk a little bit about where Myanmar is located. Myanmar is located in one of the most important regions of the world. To the west, we have India. the biggest democracy. And to the north, we have China. And to the east, we have Southeast Asia. We border with Laos and Thailand. And to the south, we have West Indian Ocean. So it's just geostrategically very important part of the world. But then it is, as Barbara has briefly mentioned, it is always underreported. And it is often neglected, even though it has the world's kind of longest running civil conflict, civil war, almost 7 decades. But it is underreported because Myanmar is regarded as a country of limited geopolitical consequence. So they don't get the international attention, despite the fact that we have had genocide and we are having ongoing war crime and crime against humanity. So one of the features of Myanmar is that we have a refreshed start, followed by the coup and then civil war. So we have been trapped in this kind of vicious cycle of violence for 70 years, like 7 decades. But some of the conflict in the country dates back to like many years ago, 8 decades, but then we don't get the attention that we deserve. So, and now again, in February 2021, we have this military junta taking over the country. And then that kind of erupted, popular uprising from the public. So we begin with peaceful demonstration. And then when these peaceful demonstrations were met with violent, brutal crackdown. So a lot of young people turned to armed resistance. So that's why now we are having this 3.5 years old conflict in Myanmar. And now because of this ongoing violence, we have 3 million internally displaced. And then the UN has kind of reported as 1/3 of the population. We are a country of 51 million. So 1/3 of the population is going to need humanitarian assistance. So this is the situation we are in. So, and of course, AJAR works on like justice and accountability issues. So one of the work, so I'm asked to talk about some of the work that we do and some of the challenges we have and how we overcome it and how the people here in Berlin or kind of around like Europe can help us with our work. So talking about our work, like we mostly work with survivors. At the same time, we work with this community because we are interested in changing the narrative that because we have had a series of peace kind of negotiation in the past. All of them have failed. So because the international community often perceive that Myanmar conflict is too complicated, it is intractable, so let's have low risk, myopic interventions. That means you involve the military. This is the elephant in the room to be addressed, but then they are always brought back to the, peace discussion so they can have the status quo. They have the political legitimacy, so they keep committing violation of human rights against the people of Myanmar. It's been going on. That's why we have to change the narrative. Yes, Myanmar conflict is complex, but then it is resolvable. So now the people of Myanmar have been in this fight for over 3.5 years. So the revolution separate is getting stronger. So at AJAR, we focus whenever we kind of work with the artist communities, we change the narrative, that take the form of kind of telling the stories of survivors, victims of human rights violation, what they want justice. Of course, we humans, if something unfair is done to us, we know. And then we can articulate what we want, even though we may be uneducated. We can articulate, what we have been through, what we want. So this is something we have been working with the artist community to talk about the experiences of survivor and human rights violation. So we also work with survivor of human rights violation. So these are the body maps. So we work together with survivors of human rights violation to talk about their life stories. So these are the powerful kind of like tool to talk with public intellectuals, academics, policymakers, and analysts. Some of the elite analysts, they kind of always, think that Myanmar conflict is too complicated, they will be the way they are, Myanmar military is going to be in power, so you can't do anything about it. But then that has been changing. So, but now, even in India that want to see the stability in Myanmar, they have started to change the tones, okay, Myanmar military is losing militarily, and then they are kind of like talk about, a lack of unity among resistant forces, so there is going to be a power vacuum. A power vacuum means more violence, more drugs that are going to be produced, in the absence of kind of like power. No. Now we are working together like side by side with our civil society organization to build the capacity of these resistant forces around like justice and accountability. And also, especially Patrick with his legal expert, like we have been kind of engaging with the government in exile. We call it National Unity Government, especially we engage with Ministry of Justice, because now we have half of the country is under the controls of like NUG and also allied kind of ethnic armed organization. So when I say control, it doesn't mean kind of the NUG would be present, in that area, because they have been like taking over the outposts of the Myanmar military junta one after another, but then maintaining that area is still kind of not kind of like properly managed, because they don't have this air defense system to protect themselves from area conducted by Myanmar military. So, but then they have been kind of working because they have captured a lot of soldiers from the Myanmar military junta. So when the question comes, how to deal with prisoners of war, how do we deal with it? So, and then we count on Patrick to help us with, training to this justice staff, senior staff, judges, lawyer. So this is the concrete work we do on the ground, not just, shaping the narrative that Myanmar conflict is too complicated. No, this is solvable. We can address the impunity. We can put in place accountability measure through training the justice staff. So this is the concrete kind of work that we have been doing. And one last but not least thing is we have started to engage with public intellectuals based in ASEAN, because a lot of government in ASEAN, they are kind of like authoritarian minded, and they often kind of cling on to this narrative, non-interference principles. But then this is not true. We have a couple of occasions in the past when the ASEAN as a regional bloc kind of did intervention. So now they pretend that this is too complicated. We cannot interfere in the internet affair of Burma. No. So we engage with this public intellectual who are who are acting as advisors to their government. So we present them with factual informations. We present them with stories of victims and survivors so that they have situation from the information from the ground, so that when they kind of advise their governments, they do it with informed kind of like decision. So this is some of the concrete work that we have been doing for Myanmar.
Thank you so much, Moses. I think it brings a lot of insights, and I'm sure there's a lot of curiosity beyond that. And what specifically impresses me is this connection. It's doing transitional justice, which for many people is after something has happened, but doing it in a spirit of changing what's going on and of preventing things to become worse, rather opt for something better, which is really exciting. So I'm tempted to ask many questions myself, but I'm refraining. I do want to give everybody of us the opportunity to contribute, to share observations, to ask questions, to learn, but also maybe to share something that might be of help for our AJAR colleagues. And I'm opening the floor to you here in Berlin, but also to those joining us online. I don't know, is there anyone tempted to already start the discussion in the room? Yes, please go ahead. Would you present yourself briefly and then?
I'm Mustaqim. I worked in Mandalay. I'm actually from Bangladesh. So I noticed there are some ethnological problems, like Myanmar, the population is sort of divided according to the lines that the British created during colonialism, So are you doing something to sort of re-educate the people, to break the boundaries,
Yeah. Should I respond now or we take more questions?
We can take, maybe give us the opportunity to have more questions if there are any, otherwise you go ahead. Is there anyone online or? Yes, please. Or from the sofa?
I'm Christina from Indonesia, and thank you for the invitation. And thank you very much. I think I just want to share the impression really that I'm very thankful for you to break the narrative on the Myanmar conflict being like nothing we can do about it. Because what you said, it shows that we can do a lot, even though it's maybe not visible from the outside, but it's transformative. So that is really, it just came home to me when you said that. But maybe connected is a question regarding what are your security, what is the condition of your security and also the people you work with? Thank you.
Thank you, both of you. Anyone else? Okay, two more, and then we go this side. And then
Yeah, my name is Mia Kruska. I'm from the Berghof Foundation from the AJAR desk here in Berlin. And I wonder, like now in the situation with the occupied areas from the military, but also the liberated areas, which is also very diverse. Like, how do you work in this field? Because I feel like you have to know the actors and they also have different narrative of history and how to deal with that. And how, like, with what groups are you engaging, and with some groups you might not engage with, like how do you decide and how do you draw the lines?
Mhm. Thank you very much, Bea. And then we'll have more rounds, don't worry.
Great question. So thank you very much. Thank you all. I want to pick up on a different intersection because it's one that I often find not easy to bridge also in our own work, and that's the one across levels. You said you're working sort of to also really engage the international community, and particularly in the EU and ASEAN. And I was just wondering if you could share a little bit more about your processes of gaining action and attracting attention in a climate where the attention is often distracted by other sort of conflict theaters that are seen as more virulent or more dangerous at the moment. And then also sort of around sort of how do you manage to speak a language that registers at that level of the multinational organization, but that still does justice to what you learn from the victims and from the populations on the ground and what their needs are.
Thank you. A wide range of questions, also a bit on the how you decide to do your work and how you engage and choose your topics. So who wants to go first?
This question? Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can go first. So, yes, thank you for the question. Yeah. It is true that this problem concerning ethnicity, race has been one of the root causes of the ongoing violence in Myanmar. Yeah. So I was talking just this morning about how the British, end up, categorizing us into, different boxes of race and ethnicity. So before the British made the decision to colonize Myanmar, so they needed the data. So they categorize everything, including humans, right? Humans, yeah. So like people in Burma, they were categorized into different ethnicities. So instead of focusing on building a sense of unity and a sense of nationhood, so that's why we are kind of regarded as a failed kind of nation building. So that problem is still there. So and then the military regime love it very much. The military junta love it very much. This is a kind of like weapon. This is a tool for them to divide and rule us. That's why they have been using this card to kind of hold on to power. So when Burma kind of like became opening up, so we had a short period of democratic transition, which lasted from 2012 to 2020. January 2021, right before the military coup. But then a lot of people started to talk about the need to have interfaith, dialogue. So that was very successful. I think many of these interfaith dialogue activities projects were funded by, I think, including EU and also the German government. So they were very successful. But then, of course, we did have a problem with genocide, in Rakhine State, where we had this Myanmar military expel many like Rohingya Muslims. So we did have the problem, but then there was a room for this interfaith dialogue to take place. So after the military coup, all those civil society organizations working on interfaith activity were displaced, they were driven out of the country. But a few of them still left, but then they have to do their work quietly. But for AJAR, so we are very much aware of this, one of the root causes of problems. So what we do is we engage with religious leaders who are now actively taking part in this revolutionary movement. So we have this network called Spring Revolution Interfaith Network. This network is led by a Buddhist monk, a very famous Buddhist monk, a Catholic priest, a Catholic father, and Muslim imams. So they have been organizing dialogue, kind of interfaith dialogue with different kind of forces of this pro-democracy movement. Yeah, so they've been talking about kind of the role of military in kind of using the religion as a tool, using the ethnicity as a tool to divide and conquer us. So it has been very effective, and then this is one of the activities. We also kind of get the Rohingya representative from Cox's Bazar to engage with this religious leader to talk about their experience, and then their voices are amplified by these religious leaders. So this is the things that we have been doing. I know it's very limited. We still have to expand it, but we are looking to expand this activity because it has been very, very effective. So in the past, the Buddhist monk and also the Catholic father, for the first time in their life, we also did not know. I'm from Myanmar, so I am very accustomed to the culture there. So when it's come to religious leader, we think that they know everything. So we rarely invite them to like training because we are afraid of offending them. But for the first time, when we got them on board with Transitional, just the training, they were so happy. They were so thrilled, finally, okay, we got into your training. So this is, the work we do. And
maybe I think this is a nice connector to the other two questions.
Yes.
A bit of how do you deal with the security risks, how do you deal with that? So much you can tell us officially and widely streamed. And the other question was also along, how do you choose whom you work with? How did you exactly discover that this would be a good connector between the different groups who need to be working together? So a bit sharing and sharing your experience with setting up activities in such complicated or complex, not complicated settings.
Yeah, speaking of safety and security, so we work with a lot of women-led organizations. Many of them are located in what we call liberated areas. So we have three different, I don't know, I have become obsessed with, categorizing. So one area is controlled by the military junta. The second area is a gray zone, neither side control, this area. And the third area is what we call liberated area controlled by the pro-democracy forces. So many of our partners are located in areas that are controlled by different ethnic armed groups, including the NUG. So like physical safety and security is just very difficult. It's just beyond our control because you have the Myanmar military junta often conduct area bombardments, you have ongoing armed clashes, So in terms of like physical violence, there is a little that we can do, but in terms of like, we also conduct the activity online. So what we do is to protect their kind of safety because the military, the junta has been kind of employing the technology, made in Russia to kind of keep track of, people, voices of dissent. So we provide them with means to have proper like digital security. So this is something we do.
Yeah,
and
maybe if I can add, the principle of do no harm is obviously first and foremost in any organization working on human rights and in conflict settings. So, if we do a training that people are participating online, but it's situation, sometimes they don't have their cameras on or anything, or we are able to send some resources to them through encrypted emails or Signal, etc. So we are trying to do a lot of those things. And we also try to introduce self-care and psychosocial support, which is very difficult to do in a conflict zone, but there are groups that are working on those things. So we do what we can, and of course there are a lot of risks, but we have to make sure that we're doing no harm, even though it is very challenging.
Yeah.
Just that we have faced some challenges. I mean, when the junta first took over, we had a team inside Burma, and we then had to take our website offline and clean back 4 years of every image and every reference to every Burmese person. So that because we're calling for international justice, we're calling for accountability for the generals who are responsible for mass killing, rape, and torture. And that means that people who are working on those things are going to be a threat. So, and we immediately did that. It was a big exercise, actually. We had to go through every photograph, take out people's faces, take out names, etc. So we're very serious about that. And our team now is not inside anymore. They're outside. They're in Thailand, and they all know that if you work for an international justice organization, you are unlikely to be able to go back inside in the junta areas. What's interesting, I mean, there's a few very interesting things about Myanmar. And I worked inside for about 7 years as a lead advisor on justice programs, because in 2012, there was a transition after 60 years of military dictatorship. For 9 years, there was kind of democracy. And civil society learned. We were all engaged, the UN, the EU, AJAR, training, people learning, the young people like, wow, we've been in this military dictatorship for so long, traveling, learning workshops, and then suddenly the military walks back in and says, we're taking over again, we're going to control it. And the young people said, the hell you are. We know what life can be like now in a democratic state, and we will never accept this again. And this is the extraordinary thing. I mean, if you know, one of the things that strikes me, for example, if you know civil servants, sort of people who work for governments, there's an extraordinary range of talented and less talented, but quite often very focused on security and long-term career choice. 200,000 Burmese civil servants have left their job, knowing they will never get them back. Their careers are over in terms of the military because they opposed what the military has done. Not 1,000, 200,000. They're asking us now, this is the complications of transitional. They asked us at the recent trainings, Patrick, can you help us with a policy? Because some of the groups are saying we have to punish all the ones who didn't leave. And they are. And they said, this is our policy. They're being deported. And I said, what do you mean deported? And they said, in some of the areas when they take control or they don't, they say, if you're still supporting the junta, you need to leave your job and move out of the area. And that's the resistance, which is using every tool that they can in this David and Goliath challenge. And so this is the sort of context that we're in now with the junta. A year ago, everybody said, oh, well, this is hopeless, right? You've got this massively armed military machine supported by China and Russia and a whole bunch of students and others who were trying to fight back. But there were 15 ethnic armies that have been fighting in these different areas. All of these thousands of young people and others, artists, students, lawyers, civil servants, taking up guns or peacefully supporting the resistance. And lo and behold, the military is starting to crumble. They've been involved for 70 years in war, not against any other country, against their own people for 70 years, using the might and the money of the country to attack their own people, 70 years. And those ethnic groups and the People's Defence Forces that are formed are having success against the military. People are deserting from the military. They don't want to attack their own people. They've now brought in a conscription law forcing young people to join the military, which has now led to thousands and thousands of young men running away. We were just talking to the KNU last week in Mysot, one of the armed resistance groups, and they said, we've got 1,000 young men under shelters over the border still running away from the country. And of course, some of those will join the resistance. They're pouring into Thailand. And they said the first 2 rounds of conscription, 5,000 each, the second one's taking place now. After 4, they're going to start taking young women. They're conscripting Rohingya, who were massacred, had been massacred for decades. And in 2017, 800,000 driven out of their homes in Bangladesh. By the military, they're now conscripting them into the military to attack their own people. So they are crumbling and they're desperate. So we're not sure what will happen, and it's a very uncertain context. And I think one of the questions you also that asked about structure, we find we work at various areas and we work with various groups. We work with civil society organizations, women's organizations, and the government. And Moses and I were doing a training for the Minister of Justice and 60 judges the week before last. For example, on these issues, they need, our goal is to equip the Burmese in organizations and individuals with the knowledge that they need to make good decisions. And they're facing potential peace processes where they're going to discuss amnesty. Do they have any idea about amnesty? No. They're facing the new constitution with federal systems and justice and various programs. Do they know the depth of that, what they need? Not so much. So we're engaged in trying to equip them with the knowledge they need to make good decisions, not us going there to tell them, oh, we did this in Indonesia, we did that in South Africa, you should decide this. They are the experts in, I always say that, they ask me and I say, I'm not the one who can answer that question, I'm not the expert in your context, you are, I'm the expert in international law. And the other thing that we find is that the examples that AJAR can use are very welcome because we work from a base in Asia. And so our context examples that we've worked in Aceh, in Indonesia, Timor-Leste, Thailand, they're based in contexts which are highly corrupt, where the military is very strong, where there's a weak rule of law, where there's a high degree of nepotism, and that resonates with them. And it's, oh, well, did you actually achieve something in AJAR with this Truth Commission that Gula's been working a lot on? Or how do you achieve things in those contexts is much more useful than in a highly developed Western context that's very well funded with a strong rule of law. So that's the way that we approach that. Maybe Gula has something to say, and then I'll add something on the structural issues.
Just to say that we've been using participatory action research as a really important process to do research and to bring the voices of survivors to the policymakers. So on the table, you can see over there, there's a paper on Papuan women. We did 100 women talking about how the displacement of their land and the destruction of their forests has impacted their lives. We have done something in the Rohingya camps. We have a number of papers around young people and what their views about truth, justice, reparations, and their future. They say they need more mental health support for us to be able to engage in this long-term process for truth and justice. So those are the ways that we are doing that. And I'm pleased you can look at our website, etc. And it's been a very key way to bring those voices, that kind of deep listening. That also means that you have to educate and discuss with them around, kind of the key areas of transitional justice, etc. And then they respond to that in terms of their own reality.
Yeah, and maybe last, you had mentioned, Moses, the difficulty of the international community maybe not getting the grace and looking for where's the main power versus fragmented opposition. So the question is, how can you educate the international community? How can you sort of drum up some support for what your analysis shows could be important? That's Bia's question. How do you engage with them? What are the anthropology? If you can share also, what are the lessons learned in the specific Myanmar case?
I mean, I think, for AJAR, we're a complementary organization with our colleagues and friends with other human rights organizations. So when we designed what we do, we took into account what other organizations do so well. Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, etc. are our colleagues in this. We're not competitors, and they do the investigations and naming and shaming. It's so important, and it's such a great job. We decided to base ourselves on a capacity building framework. But we also do some of that research and reaching up. And we have a theory of change that's like a triangle. And the bottom is changing the level of knowledge of the general population. And the second level is boutique or civil society organizations that are already engaged in this field. The third level is helping connections between different organizations, individual, and then at the top we have policy and legal change. So at the bottom level, we've made television series, popular series that are comedy and football and drama, but have human rights and gender equality and other messages in them. We use film, we have song competitions on justice. We had a song competition in the Rohingya camps. We had film competition for young Burmese filmmakers during the early days after the coup, where all of them couldn't show themselves on camera, which was fascinating to see the techniques that they used, masks and different things. We use a lot, and the young people are not reading so much, so we have a big youth program in AJAR. Youth like myself, I'm one of those youth activists. So we focus a lot on that and a lot on, because this is a long road. If you're a hair shirt right and wrong person, a couple of years later, you're going to be burned out. You know, if you're not having some degree of fun and joy in your work, you're not going to last the distance when the road is up and down like it is in our field. So we try to make our activities enjoyable, fun. Music is a big part. And what's fascinating is music is everywhere. We just finished the training with 60 judges and they had a guitar. I'm a singer-songwriter, right? So they asked me to play a song. I played one. And then one of the Burmese played this incredibly beautiful resistance song. Yes. With everybody, all the judges singing. And I remember one of my friends in South Africa saying, without the songs, we would never have had the revolution. And, you know, we recognize that. So that's the bottom level. The second level, we do a lot of, because that's where civil society organizations dedicated to human rights, gender equality, etc., sit. So we try to help them to be more effective in what they do. Training on international law, how do you connect with the UN? So we try and help them connect with ASEAN, the UN, and others, understand lessons learned from other organizations. Even their administration base is often weak. How do they get more funds? Those sorts of things. The third level is connection. And because we're regional, we have a Transitional Justice Asia network that we co-founded, and we're the secretariat with 9 countries from the region that we work on transitional justice together. That's the connection. And then at the top, and our triangle is like that, with more work at the base and civil society. And it does lead to international representation. And Galu and I and a couple of others do most of that. But some other organizations, actually, if you were looking at them, they would look the other way. You know, there'd be a lot at the international level, and they'd talk about victims being the center of their work, but there'd be very little actual work with victims. So it's our commitment that we think we want to do it this way. When we get the information, we get very good information because we are trusted and well known at the grassroots level and with the civil society organizations. Then we can work at the other levels. We have a full-time staff member since the coup, working in Jakarta on ASEAN, on advocating for Myanmar in ASEAN, for example. Slow going, but I think we're the only organization that would dedicate a staff member to trying to make sure ASEAN does not recognize the junta as the legitimate government. Consistently bringing up these issues at every meeting, every civil society meeting. So we work at that level. You know, I worked in the UN as a director of human rights for 6 years. I have a whole lot of connections there. So Galu is an international expert. She spoke last week at an international conference on the issue of children born of rape. So we're connected to some degree at these senior levels. I'll go to represent AJAR at the annual meeting of NGOs at the ICC next week for a week. So that's how and you see, we're here now with Moses from the field with international experts, and we're all the same age. So this is a representation of how we do that, but we do find, and it's, to be honest, it's a bit of a chat. When we decided to base AJAR in Jakarta, it was a reaction to working in the north-based organizations, and we wanted something based in the south. It makes it harder to fundraise, actually, and because we're not meeting donors all the time, we're working in the field, and many of the donors are in Europe or the US, etc. And most organizations they say regional work is very important, but the funding is per country. So when we have regional programs, people say that's so important, but they're not structured to support that. So there are some challenges with that, but that's our approach. We're committed to working with survivors, but it needs to be in a way that creates change. So their voices need to be amplified and projected through film, music, documentation, representation at international events. There you go.
Thank you very much. It's really a quilt. It's really a jigsaw. Everything has to fit together and you have to keep the different elements in mind and hopefully cover the most important
Yeah,
ones.
Carlo, do you have more to add on that?
I will have to maybe, if you give me the chance, is there anyone from online? We have 3 more questions. You can, I'm sure you have some more things to add. Could I ask you to factor them into the next round of questions or observations? I have 3 persons. I have Till, Oliver, and Friedrich. Genau. Could you comment or ask or whatever your endeavor is? Till is first, then Oliver, and then Federico.
Thanks. Hey, Tim, my name. I'm a project manager here at Berghof Foundation, and thanks for bringing up the role that participatory action research can play to influence policymakers. And we're doing actually something quite similar, working with 2 of the heroes in Myanmar and do participatory action research on WPS and try to influence thereby the policies of the EROs. So we have the difficulty, and that's also my question, that the groups we are working with are groups that are already quite progressive. So the policymakers are willing to also work on this, because when working with groups that are maybe less willing to do so, well, the policymakers can relatively easy stop such process of participatory research that is conducted on the ground. So how are you dealing with this difficulty? Because I think, like, especially in the context of transitional justice, policymakers might often be actually the ones that can be held accountable for the actions they have committed in the past. So how are you dealing with this? And then in the context of Myanmar, it's also a bit to Mia's question. So how do we work with groups that are maybe not directly located at the border with Thailand, but up north or so?
How do we work with groups?
That are maybe not directly or not that easy accessible from Thailand, not progressive, but further north or other groups.
Thank you.
Yeah, it might. Thank you. It might go in a similar direction. You described, your pyramid. I see it as a pyramid, this amplifying and bottom empowerment process, bottom up, and it goes in a similar direction. I mean, this is not always a context of freedom and of democracy. So these alternative messages are provoking to someone and also to power holders. And I really didn't understand now a lot of what you were saying of how do you deal with this? Because in my work, from I know, we constantly are in the discussion of how can we get things public without being killed politically. And it's still politically killing, it's not physical killing. And it's not the same tough context you are dealing with. So I don't understand the whole dynamic of how you deal with resistance. And actually, I don't understand if you would have only, not only, I mean, just focusing on the civil society empowerment with your little plants that are already existing. Yeah? And you also make the connection to the prosecution element. This is even a bigger killer now, than the dynamic we just indicated. So this is a question. It's a bit big.
Easy question. We'll answer that in 2 minutes, no problem. We'll add one more question and then if it's very short, add it, but we said we would last 10 more minutes. So maybe some of the interesting issues and long issues can be dealt with over a cup of something later on.
Yeah, Frederick, Bread for the World. And I have one observation also with the public servant story you told. What I heard also from other organizations is that many public servants stay in their position, but used as internal resistance, to use the position to help people somehow within the military framework. So that's also very interesting compared to the ones that fled, that actually stay in there and try to One question is, work mostly in the liberated areas. Liberated in my head sounds like very peaceful. Of course, it's not. So especially in the areas where the liberation means that still the ethnic groups fight each other. So the military is out, but it's even worse now because the different groups fight each other. How do you deal with that, since you're mostly in that areas? You also try to work with these ethnic armed groups to reconcile them with each other. Yeah, mostly for Moses, but yeah, that's big question as well.
Big questions. For the sake of the audience, also online, I don't know, Matthias, do we have anyone? No. If we can take maybe 5 minutes longer, you give us a glimpse of some of the answers, and then we hope for more dialogue later on. Or we might even have another event to dwell on the risks, on how to reach some of the people, and how to not, move yourself or the people you work with out of life or out of security or out of political theft.
Right. So the quick answer is, safety first, do no harm. And a lot of the processes we do with participatory action research, of course, there has to be safe space for them to speak. And then any kind of publication does not include names, they become anonymous, etc. So that's the answer. But other examples, for example, you can see our publication on Papua and land conflict. I mean, that is very controversial. It's very difficult to work on that issue in Indonesia. We get trolls, like there's a whole bunch of people in cyberspace who then attacked our website has been attacked. But we're able to sort of find that balance of talking about Indigenous women's rights and the forest. Somehow, we're still able to do that. I think in Myanmar, it's even harder because of security issues. And we have mostly been working with in coalition with other groups. So, we will join letters with Progressive Voice and other organizations, or we will also write sometimes to the UN Special Rapporteur in a confidential manner. There are different ways that we are doing this, and it's not always that we're publishing it on our website. So it's actually, we make sure that we are, that safety is really important. That's the short version.
Thank you.
Oh, but before I just want to also mention that a really important example of working on transitional justice in difficult contexts is the AJAR Truth Commission, and that in December 2023 they produced their final report, and hopefully this July we will, together with them, launch the English version. So that's lots of pressure on them. The military is still there, the intelligence is still there, and a lot of pushback, but still you can find the cracks.
Thank you for that note of hope again.
Yeah, in addition to like safety and security kind of like stuff, there is entrenched patriarchal norm among this ERO. So when we talk about progressive, there's some of the ERO that are progressive. I doubt that because even in these democratic transitions, kind of a lot of European kind of countries pour their money to support that peace process. Yeah. So, and then that support come with condition. One of the condition is the quota for women to participate in that process. So there is one woman that told me that, yes, we are kind of, dragged into this peace negotiation for the sake of, filling in the seats, 35% or 30%. But then they are not allowed to take part in discussion. They only, the tension get out of control among, this armed group. They are like dragged into this discussion, this discussion to diffuse the tension. That is their role. So they ease and entrench, patriarchal kind of norms and practices That's why even, after this military coup and even within this revolution movement, we still have a lot of patriarchal kind of practices, excluding women from important discussion. That's why just recently we have had this women kind of network organizing mennos to call them out, to call them out publicly, So that kind of sent a wave of shock, throughout this revolution movement, because we used to say that, oh, this revolution is led by young generation, so they are very progressive, they are very open to different kind of like the equality, blah, blah, blah. But then we still have many important discussions, including security, taking place without the participation of women. Isn't that weird? That's why women organization, because now there is a concern, a serious concern that, oh, this movement, revolution movement is not united, they will exhaust at some point, and then they will get back to the situation. So that's why this women organization, they don't want to speak out, but then they were forced to speak out because it became too much. So this is where we are now. And then talking about how we strategically engage with armed actors. We are not allowed to engage with armed actors. I mean, direct engagement with armed actors. What we do is we help kind of establish Transitional Justice Alliance Group, which is made up of civil society organization. All of them are global, national civil society organization. AJAR is the only one kind of regional organization that is part of that alliance. So whenever we engage with this armed state actors, so we engage with this political representatives. So these ethnic armed groups, they have established, they have set up what they call interim political kind of representative. So whatever, whenever and whatever that we have to talk about transitional justice issue of justice and accountability, we use that platform, civil society platform, to engage with this political representative to convey our messages. So this is the way like we have been dealing with different ethnic armed groups, because their interests, political interests, economic interests are very diverse. So, but then we are not allowed to directly deal with them. So we use this civil society platform to engage with them.
Thank you, Moses. So Patrick, you have the last word.
First of all, just briefly on Frederick's point, it's true. I mean that some civil servants remain in the job in order to work covertly for the resistance. And that's why when they ask us to help, we're like, well, we're looking for examples in other countries of what's been done. And one of the answers is exactly that, a case-by-case treatment of the individuals, at least. Some people have disabled children, or they're supporting the resistance, so you can't have a blanket treatment of anyone. But it's just one of the challenges that we do face. Just briefly on the point of working on prosecutions, I have worked a lot with military perpetrators, military in systems where they've been the major perpetrators, with the Indonesian military following the transition, with the Sri Lankan military, with the Thai military. And it's not, I mean, we are not prohibited from working with the ethnic armed groups. It depends on what program we're funded under and what the donor's policy may be. For me, I find that it's not difficult for me to deal with. I find that they are actually hungry for information. They want to know what they should be doing and about war crimes and these type of things. As long as I don't use them as the example, right? So when I'm in Sri Lanka, I use Indonesia as the example. And when I'm in Indonesia, I use Sri Lanka as the example. So as long as we're dealing with, oh, in Sri Lanka, they had this situation. And then it's not like I've been in many rooms where I said to military guys, who in this room thinks that rape is a legitimate tool that should be used by your military for purposes of your military goals? I'm yet to find anyone who will stand up and say, oh, yes. And so I said, well, what if we started with rape if you're doing the prosecution? Shouldn't members of your military be prosecuted if they're raping women in conflict? Or is that part of who you are and part of who you want to be known as? And so, and offences against children, I use those kind of entry points with them because, and they often say, I was just doing my duty. So when I explain to them that when you're doing your duty, it's not a crime. You're allowed to kill the soldiers on the other side, the armed groups. You're just not allowed to kill civilians, rape women and torture. A lot of them are relieved in a way. So we can deal with these issues, and we do, in a way that's empowering for whoever it is. They're empowered because they know more about the sorts of laws that they should be using. And just in completion on the issue of Myanmar, because, when we delve into it, we say it's very complicated and very challenging, and it is true, but it's incredibly inspiring to work on this context right now. There's a whole population that is collectively resisting oppression and violent destruction of the democratic base. All, yes, coming from different ethnic groups with different armed groups, and it's very complex, but there is a feeling of shared goal. And people say, oh, there's a lot of independence movements among them. That's a question of contention. There's another view of that none of the armed groups, with the exception potentially of the Arakan army, want independence. And the AJAR, for example, are the largest drug cartel in the world. And 30,000 armed troops with uniforms in a very small area, 7-star hotels and casinos and the Chinese border. That looks like a strong fort when you're part of Myanmar with China on the border. If you're not part of Myanmar and you're just the AJAR, why would the Chinese not walk in and take your casinos and everything else? So the armed groups and whether they want to be independent is, I think it's an ill-informed view. And we need to work with them, and we are, around what would that mean? Independence. And some of the key issues when you have experience in these areas like financing. How do you finance, if you have a federal state, for example, what are the financing, what you keep and what the centre keeps? If you have an independent area, the land borders are going to be, before you know it, you're fighting about, there's a resource on the other side of your land border that you want or the stronger person wants. All of those issues are very complex, and we need to just remind those groups that I think there is a general feeling that a federal state is their goal coming out of this. We need to empower them so they understand the implications of all of that and try and keep this positive drive of the inspirational revolutionary force going through the transition and empower them with as much knowledge as we can. So that's my final.
Thank you. And I'm sorry for the one who's exerting a bit of time pressure, but thank you so much for giving all of us a lot of things to think about, a lot of examples to dwell on, and a lot of things to further discuss. So I think this is not the end of any discussion around those difficult things, but also, the cracks of hope, the sprouts of that are there to build on. I think I take away a lot of inspiration. I'm really thankful for that, even in the light of very grim and very difficult and complex circumstances. So you've said something very nice. So in order to be in for the long haul, to walk the distance, we need something to nourish us. It can be music, it can be community, it can be connecting. And thank you for being here, for giving life also to the Transitional Justice Hub in the very same sense, for learning together, but also for being there to take a glass of something afterwards with all of us to continue the discussion, answer some unanswered questions, and to continue the journey together for transitional justice, for peace building, for braving all the difficult circumstances we have. Thank you all very much for being here, for being part of that discussion. Thanks for our colleagues, for technology, for organizing everything, for bringing out the wine. I'm really happy that we could have that discussion. Thank you.